So this is Part B, B1, Type 1 applicants. Part B contains material aimed at technicians who maintain, service, or repair small appliances. Small appliances are any of the following products that are fully manufactured, charged, and hermetically sealed in a factory with 5 pounds or less of refrigerant. Refrigerators and freezers designed for home use, room air conditioners, including window air conditioners, packaged terminal heat pumps, dehumidifiers, under-the-counter ice makers, vending machines, and drinking water coolers. Small appliance definition. As a certified Type 1 technician, you'll be authorized to maintain, service, and repair small appliances. Small appliances are defined by the EPA as products manufactured, charged, and hermetically sealed in a factory and have 5 pounds or less of refrigerant. The maximum allowable factory charge of refrigerant for Type 1 appliances using CFCs, HCFCs, and HFCs is 5 pounds. Type 1 or universal certification is required if you plan to perform service on a small appliance seal system. However, Type 1 or universal certification does not cover MVAC-like systems that hold 3 pounds of R12. After passing the Type 1 or universal examination, technicians are certified to charge and open small appliance equipment. The sale of CFC, HCFC, HFC, and HFO refrigerants to service or install refrigeration and air conditioning equipment will be restricted to technicians who are EPA certified in refrigerant recovery. R600A is the approved refrigerant for new household refrigerators, freezers, and a combination refrigeration freezers. Hydrocarbons are not approved for retrofit applications into existing household refrigerators. New household refrigerators may be manufactured with R290, R450A, or R600A. New household refrigerators may not be charged with R404A. Recovery requirements. Recovery equipment used for maintenance, service, or repair of small appliances that use CFCs, HCFCs, or HFCs must be certified by an EPA-approved laboratory. These devices must be able to recover 90% of the refrigerant when the recovery unit's compressor is operating or achieve a 4-inch vacuum under conditions of AHRI 740. So that's important, it's circled. Equipment which is used to recover CFC, HCFC, and HFC refrigerant from small appliances for the purpose of disposal must be able to recover 80% of the refrigerant with an inoperative compressor when it doesn't work, and 90% of the refrigerant with an operative compressor that does work. Any person who opens an appliance containing CFC, HCFC, or HFC for maintenance, service, or repair must have at least one self-contained recovery machine available for use. The exception to this rule is persons working on small appliances. There are 2 types of recovery equipment. One is the system-dependent or passive type, and the other is the self-contained or active type. EPA Section 608 rules require capture of 80% of the HCFCs and HFCs from a small appliance sealed system with a non-operating compressor if the technicians are using either a passive or an active recovery process. So passive is system dependent, active is self-contained. R744 is a very high pressure refrigerant and generally does not need to be recovered. A domestic refrigerator is an example of a device where it would be permissible to use a passive recovery device for recovery of CFCs, HCFCs, and HFCs. The maximum normal charge of HCFC and HFC refrigerant in an appliance that is allowed to use a system-dependent recovery unit is 15 pounds. Low loss fittings. The EPA also requires that refrigerant recovery devices be equipped with low loss fittings. A low loss fitting is used to connect the recovery device to an appliance, which can be manually closed or which closes automatically when disconnected to prevent loss of refrigerant from the hoses. Service aperture process stubs. Another EPA ruling is that all appliances must be equipped with a service aperture or other device which is used when adding or removing refrigerant from the appliance. The EPA requires that all small appliances be manufactured with a process stub or pigtail for most small appliances. However, the service port typically is a straight piece of tubing that is entered using a piercing access valve. When installing any type of access fitting onto a sealed system, the fitting should be leak tested before proceeding with recovery. Leak repair. Unlike some of the other equipment, when you are servicing small appliances, you do not have a mandatory repair requirement. According to the EPA, when you are servicing a small appliance for leak repair, it is not mandatory to repair the leak, but do so whenever possible. Recovery techniques. You will need to know some information about common refrigerants and their temperature-pressure relationship. When checking for non-condensables inside a recovery cylinder known to contain only one refrigerant, the technician should allow the temperature of the cylinder to stabilize to room temperature before taking a pressure reading. By doing this, he is able to make a comparison on the pressure temperature chart to determine if non-condensables are present within the recovery cylinder. If you suspect a recovery cylinder is contaminated, you may take a pressure reading of the recovery cylinder to help you determine if it is contaminated. Up here it says can mix oil, no drops in, no mixing, not allowed. Before beginning a refrigerant recovery procedure, it is always necessary to know the type of refrigerant that is in the system. If the technician suspects that the refrigerant in the recovery cylinder is contaminated, then the refrigerant needs to be turned in for reclamation. If a reclamation facility receives a tank of mixed refrigerant, they may refuse to accept the refrigerant or charge extra for processing. No drop-in. As regard to drop-in substitute issue, at this point in time, it is generally recognized that direct drop-ins are not feasible in any equipment. There is no such thing as a drop-in substitute. Using non-pressurized recovery containers. When using a system-dependent passive recovery process, start recovery from each and every appliance using a non-pressurized recovery cylinder. A system-dependent passive recovery process for small appliances captures refrigerant in a non-pressurized container. Tips on use of system-dependent or passive recovery devices. Tips on use of system-dependent recovery devices when used with small appliances. Non-operating compressor. Take measures to help release trapped CFC, HFC, or HFC refrigerant from the compressor oil during refrigerant recovery. Number 2, access both the high and low side of the system for refrigerant recovery. This will enhance speed of recovery and may be necessary for efficient recovery. And 3, it is helpful to heat and strike the compressor with a rubber mallet. self-contained recovery unit, or active. When using a self-contained recovery device on a CFC, HCFC, or HFC system with an operating compressor, technicians must either recover the refrigerant to 4 inches of HG vacuum or recover 90% of the nameplate charge. Excessive pressure on the high side of a self-contained or active recovery device is caused when there is a large volume of non-condensable gas in the refrigerant being recovered. General information. A standard vacuum pump designed specifically for evacuation and dehydration can never be used as a recovery device in combination with a pressurized container. When R410A is recovered from an appliance, it should be recovered into a recovery vessel that is clearly marked to ensure that mixing of refrigerants does not occur. And these are important, you have them underlined. A storage cylinder of recovered R134A does not contain any non-condensable impurities and is stored in a room where the temperature is 80 degrees Fahrenheit, will have an approximate pressure of 87 psig inside the cylinder. The approximate pressure of a storage container of recovered R404A that does not contain any non-condensable impurities and is stored in a room where the temperature is 80 degrees Fahrenheit will be 174 psig. The approximate pressure of a storage cylinder of recovered R410A that does not contain a non-condensable impurities and is stored in a room where the temperature is 80 degrees Fahrenheit will be 238 psig. Never overfill a recovery tank. The only correct way to be sure that your recovery tanks are not over 80% full is to weigh them or use self-contained recovery unit that shuts off when the recovery tank is 80% full. An acceptable method or device presently used for monitoring the 80% fill level in a recovery tank is a set of refrigerant scales or a tank internal float device, which is kind of like that float device in a toilet tank. Recovery and evacuating tips. After installing and opening a piercing access valve, the recovery procedure cannot begin if the system is at 0 psig. There is no refrigerant in the system to recover. Solderless type piercing valves should not remain installed on refrigeration systems after the completion of repairs because they tend to leak over time. A good maintenance practice is to check your recovery equipment for leaks on a regular basis. After recovering refrigerant from a sealed system, if nitrogen is used to pressurize or blow debris out of the system, the nitrogen may be vented to the ambient air. That means you can let it out to the air around you. If you detect a pungent odor during a sealed system recovery and or repair, you should suspect a compressor burnout. Refrigerants cannot be mixed in an appliance. If you are evacuating a sealed system that has an operating compressor and a completely restricted capillary tube, you will need only one access valve. This would be the high side of the system. When recovering from a frost-free refrigerator, the defrost heater can be turned on to increase the refrigerant's temperature and vaporize any liquid. Having manual or self-sealing valves on the end of your hoses will minimize any refrigerant releases when attaching manifold gauges to the system. The EPA requires that if you vent off the top when filling a charging cylinder, the refrigerant must be recovered if it is a CFC, HCFC, or HFC. The service technician should watch for signs of contamination in the oil when recovering refrigerant from a system that has experienced a compressor burnout. If the system has a burnout, it will need to be flushed. Safety. The safe handling of refrigerants and their usage should always be important to you as you service refrigeration and air conditioning equipment. Potential for injury is always present when working with pressurized systems. Listed below are some of the safety concerns that you may encounter when working with appliances. Always wear eye protection and protective butyl-lined gloves when connecting or disconnecting refrigerant hoses. When using nitrogen and repairing a sealed refrigeration system, the nitrogen tank should always be equipped with a regulator. Number 3, never expose CFC or HCFC refrigerants to high temperatures, particularly open flames or hot glowing metal surfaces that are present during soldering, brazing operations. Forms hydrochloric and hydrofluoric acids. So you should never expose CFC and HCFC refrigerants to high temperatures, especially open flames and glowing metal surfaces that are present during soldering and brazing operations, because these could form hydrochloric and hydrofluoric acids. Number 4, CFC and HCFC refrigerants exposed to high temperatures, particularly open flames or hot glowing metal surfaces, decompose to form phosgene gas. A very large refrigerant leak can cause suffocation because refrigerants are heavier than air and displace the oxygen in the space. And if a large leak of refrigerant occurs, such as from a filled cylinder in an enclosed area, and there is no self-contained breathing apparatus, you should vacate and naturally ventilate the area. And number 7, permanent safety markings are not required on the inside of the refrigerator door on household refrigerators using HC refrigerants.